Hello, everybody. We're
Hello.
going to put together our third program on the third opera, which we're going to, or would have presented in this year's 2020 Festival at the Grange, which is now going to happen next year in 2021. And I'm incredibly pleased and thrilled that we have three of the main participants in our production of Manon Lescaut by Puccini. And I'd like to introduce our director, Stephen Lawless, whose name, if you've had anything to do with opera in any parts of the world for the last 30 years, you will know, because he's done memorable productions of most of the repertoire somewhere. He and I first came across each other many years ago in the Sussex Downs in a wonderful opera house, beginning with G. I won't go any further than that. And we had a fantastic time. He did a brilliant production of Benjamin Britten's Death in Venice, and we all had a great time doing it. And it's really wonderful that he's agreed to come back and work for us at the Grange. I'm going to ask him to say a few words about what he's proposing for us in a minute. And then we are really thrilled also, Francesco Cilluffo. Salve, maestro, buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
Francesco is speaking from his house in Italy, in Milano, where he's been in a much worse lockdown than any of us have experienced in the UK. Even going to the shop to buy something has been really, really hard, and they haven't been able to have proper walks or anything. And this has been going on for more than a month for Francesco in Milan, so he's looking very well on it, I have to say. Remarkable. Then you're still good-humoured and in good shape is wonderful, and he'll be speaking a little bit later. Francesco, you may remember, has been with us before at the Grange, fantastically what did you do, Francesco? I keep forgetting.
Falstaff.
You certainly did Falstaff. You certainly did. He's done.
I even said it in an English way.
He did his first Verdi Requiem for us at the Grange, and last year he did this incredible Falstaff, which everybody was so thrilled with. Sorry, I had a momentary senior moment there. And Elin, also in Falstaff, sang beautifully and is going to do her first Manon Lescaut for us at the Grange next year now. And it's been really exciting that we've been able to suggest this part to her, and she's seized it with alacrity, and even already been to New York to get some coaching on it, and might even go to New York again or somewhere else to get some more coaching on it, because it's an incredibly demanding part, but absolutely, I think, perfect for her. Perfect for you, Elin. I hope you feel it is perfect for you. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I do, and I feel like I've been given plenty of time to prepare.
Good.
You know,
Fantastic.
Having the extra time now, it'll only just benefit me. You know.
Yeah, wonderful. So we'll talk more about that later. And at the end of this, I think if we can manage to get together, Elin and Francesco are going to somehow combine internationally and produce a at-home performance of one of the arias from Manon Lescaut for us, and Elin will introduce that later. So I'm now going to ask Stephen to say a few words about doing this opera for us. Sorry, I'm playing around with the controls myself, and it's probably going wrong. And what he plans for us for this production, and working in a small opera house like the Grange. Stephen, I suspect, mostly does rather bigger opera houses these days. So the relatively small stage and the small auditorium and the very intimate surroundings for an opera, which was originally done in the Teatro Regio in Turin, which is much bigger at the time, I think it presents some sort of a challenge. So, Stephen, do you think this opera is unsuitable for the Grange, or do you think actually it might work quite well?
Well, I think actually, you know, despite the size of the orchestra and everything else, I think it's actually very intimate piece. So I think the size of the Grange would suit it really, really well. And I think the last thing that the piece needs, in a sense, is to try and blow it up into something more grandiose than it actually is. And in fact, what we've tried to do is to take those ideas about, you know, smaller theatre, young cast, and actually go in the opposite direction with it, to try and make it more intimate.
So one of the things that I think about the Grange is that so many of the operas which were written in the second half of the 19th century, and of course through Mozart and Haydn and Handel as well, but that's obvious, is in fact that many of their original performances were done in relatively small theatres. And one of the theatres I've sung in a lot, for instance, is in Florence, in Firenze, called the Teatro alla Pergola, where Verdi premiered Macbeth, for instance, which is always conceived as a huge opera. So in fact, the original intentions were quite focused and constrained. And I think our theatre at the Grange allows one to return to the sort of situation which existed. And also it allows singers not to feel they have to sing full out all the time. They can discover some of the art of bel canto as it was originally thought. I don't know, what do you think about that?
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I actually worked on it when I was an assistant many years ago at Covent Garden with Kiri and Placido and Tom Allen, and Sinopoli conducted, and Gertrude directed. And it always, so I've been living with it for this piece for about 30 years. Now it's always sort of intrigued me, really, because if you just go and try and do a kind of representation of the 18th century, if you go with the novel on which it's based, it's somehow with the Puccini, you miss it. I think if you, with the Massenet, you have to kind of go with the 18th century, I think, because there's a lot of musical pastiche in there, 18th century musical pastiche. But this is something different. And so what we've tried to do is try and find some way of finding a milieu to set it in that makes it sound what I hear in it, which is something modern, not something backward looking so that's what we've attempted. And I'm not a great one for moving periods just for the sake of it, but we've moved it to just before the Second World War. It starts off in the Second World War, so Act 1 is 1939, Act 2 is 1940, Act 3 is 1943, and Act 4 is, we just leave open. But there is this fantastic depiction of youth, of the joys of youth, and how that youth, all that hope and all that possibility gets crushed by circumstance. And so what we wanted to do was find a way to actually physicalize that, to be able to put that on stage. So, and we've said it in Paris. So it's before the German invasion, it's during the occupation, it's after the liberation, is what we've gone for.
Actually, just you saying that, of course, I'm trying to get myself in the picture and it's not really working, so I'm going to say, I have to look at you, Stephen. These incredibly intense love affairs conducted during wartime in cities like Paris and London and others were so much more heightened than they would have been in any other time. So in fact, that period setting is really, really good for this story when it's such an intense love story. Yeah.
But there's also something else with, which is, there is this kind of, it has, the music has for me, Puccini, when he wrote it, was not that young a man. He was, mid-late 30s. And there is, for me, something in there, which is a kind of, in the music, which is a kind of memory of what it was like. So it's, it is, it's looking backwards on as a memory of what first love was like.
Absolutely, yeah, very, very good. I'm going to move on to Francesco now. Stephen, thank you very much. But if you think of anything else while Francesco and I and Elin and I are talking, perhaps please come in. Francesco, welcome again. Wonderful. And this is going to be your first time of conducting Manon Lescaut, I believe. Is that right? Have you worked on it before?
I've done bits of it. It's mostly arias, of course, but I've never done a full production of the opera. So it's again, a debut at the Grange. I mean, what Falstaff wasn't, but Verdi's Requiem was, and that was actually my UK professional debut as well.
Wow, big moment.
Yeah, because
I think it'll be written in the history books as a big moment.
Because I mean, I did study at Guildhall in London, but I conducted a lot there as a student. But then there was a bit of a gap, and then I came back professional at your place. So I'm always thankful for that.
Can I just talk about your UK education? Because I hadn't quite realised you were at the Guildhall, but you also did a PhD at King's London, I think.
Yeah, I did, because I did a master at Guildhall, and then I stayed on as a fellow there. But then I started a PhD in composition at the King's College London. Yeah, so that I kind of moved to London as soon as I graduated in Torino, which is my hometown, and also the city where Manon Lescaut was premiered, as you said. And then I did my postgraduate in London. Yeah.
Just to investigate that a little bit further, why did you feel that London was a good place to come as opposed to staying in Italy for that further education?
Well, I always had a very kind of instinctive feeling of belonging to London since the very first time I went there on a school trip. I felt there was something in the air that just spoke to me, and then I used, even by then, reading books in English and watching TV series well time before Netflix was there in the original language, and I was in love with Benjamin Britten, because I did a thesis for my university in Turin about Billy Budd. So it kind of, and I was the only Italian who was obsessed by tea drinking and all that. So it all had to come, somewhere around there. But also because at that particular time I was more, I was always, composer and conductor, but at that time I was still more composer. There was, I felt in London there was a freedom of style in the expression of contemporary composer, which at that time Italy didn't quite have. It was still pretty much avant-garde-ish in a way. And I felt, as always, that a good change of scenery after spending so many years studying in Italy was good. And just London kind of felt right. And the Guildhall had a great program, and I auditioned for that. I got in. That was it.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I love the way that Billy Budd and tea drinking brought you to the UK. What better? Puccini, conducting Puccini. I reckon it must be very hard, because there's a real idiom about that music, which needs to be innate somehow. And when you hear Puccini conducted by people who don't quite get it, it always sounds a little bit stilted to me. Can you talk a little bit about that, how actually difficult it is to get it right?
I think, well, what is difficult about Puccini, first of all, is his position, and Manon Lescaut is a perfect example of this. His position in music history is such that he's still looking at the late Verdi, and we did Falstaff together there, so we know what we're talking about. And he's a bridge going towards modern music and contemporary music, about everything that 20th century music was. So I think it's very hard to keep a balance between this urge of larger than life pictures, which in a way brings him more towards, I would say, expressionism and German music, which was obsessed by, he was one of the very few Italian composers who actually went to Bayreuth to hear Wagner music. And on this other side, there's completely Italianate and sometimes still even a bit bel cantish wave of understanding the vocal line. And that's where the big, I think the big quality of Puccini's opera is that you have the orchestra, which is treated in a way that no other Italian composer has done before, which is an incredible mixture of late Verdi, Richard Strauss and Puccini, and sometimes even Shostakovich, way time before, Shostakovich was there. So I think it's really tricky is that you have to keep all those elements in one way of the storytelling. And, Puccini in a way was also the first really composer who fought already in cinematographic ways. Something like Manon Lescaut is completely like what you would imagine that movie music sounded like before it was, before movie was there. And also I think because there's on one side there's that, but then if you if you bend too much on one side, the modern side, then it risks to become something intellectual, which is totally is not, because then there's a complete, like, you know, no feeling are held back there. Everything is there. In fact, I think Elin will agree about that. It's very hard as a performer not to be drawn by it, because you always have to manage to get somehow some kind of distance from that in order to tell the story and not be in a way swallowed by it. And it's very challenging doing that.
It's really interesting just to hear that, because it's that degree of self-indulgence which so many conductors are tempted to bring to it, so that you overdo the schmaltziness, you overdo the romanticism, and you've just described to me incredibly clearly, which in a way that I've never really heard before, what actually informs Puccini's music, which is a far wider palette of other sounds, including Wagner, for instance, which is which makes it instantly more interesting to me. Elin, would you like to say something about it? We'll come back to you, Francesco, in a minute, if I may. Elin, what do you feel about what Francesco just said about the music, which you spent a year or more.
I completely agree with Francesco. I think it's funny because I've done a few Puccini roles, and Manon is in a complete different league. And what Francesco is saying is you have to have that 10% in your mind where you're not getting carried away, because as soon as you go too deep into whichever scene you're doing, first of all, you'll lose it technically, so it's a goner. But secondly, it's overindulgent, it's self-indulgent, it's you lose the true meaning of what he's writing for the voice. And I'm sure we'll probably do it in the rehearsal room together, and then Stephen or Francesco will go, right, you enjoyed yourself there, but actually that's not what we're trying to get here, Yeah. And I completely agree. It's she's in it, there's times where I was studying her, and with Tosca or Mimi or Mosetta, Lauretta even, you can kind of get carried away. But with Manon, it's like you have to have this little thing in your head, kind of just going, right, okay, yeah, just realize what you're doing here, because she's a completely different, and the way he's written her as well, she's a completely different vocal being. Tosca, you can really let rip, and beautiful stuff in the final scenes in Tosca, the most amazing things. But the same with Manon, the most amazing music in the final act. But there's always a part where I'm like, oh gosh, yeah, that's coming around the corner now. Okay, I can't quite go that far there, and so it's been a challenge. Yeah. But also it's kind of, I find it so interesting character-wise, because I feel like the vocal line and the music and the character are all entwined so well that it's not about, a lot of singers will say you take a breath and then you just, you go on that path and you stay on it. But with this, you take a breath, and there's so many twists and turns in her, especially in Act 2. It's literally, quite a momentous feat if you get to the end and you've actually done it the way you thought you should have gone, because it's so easy to get derailed.
Yeah. So it's a huge challenge, this role. I think it should be stressed, not least in stamina terms, but emotional range, vocal range, and just the range of thought, thought processes, and there's a very, very long emotional journey which you go through for the whole piece. So I'd have thought somebody in your prime as you are, which would be a fantastic thing to take on.
Yes, it's going to be brilliant, and it's a challenge though. I think most singers will say there'll be a role that'll challenge them, and I definitely think, it's the same as Violetta as well. I think there's certain roles that challenge you personally. I've still got this ongoing battle with Manon at the moment, where I think people label her too harshly. I think there's a lot of vulnerability to her. While people, you know, I've read so much on the internet, you know, just different reviews and different articles about the opera, and they're quick to say, you know, she's greedy, she's selfish, she's one-minded. And actually, you know, I want to try and find something different.
Stephen, I mean, you've done a lot of Puccini. How do you think this particular opera fits into the whole gamut of Puccini operas? I mean,
I haven't done a lot of Puccini. In fact, I've only ever done one Bohème and a Tosca.
Oh my God, I would imagine.
But I'm intrigued by what Francesco and Elin are saying, really, which is this attempt not to be overindulgent with it. And by that, I think what they're implying is not to sentimentalize. And I think that's how we kind of still, to a certain extent, think of Puccini as being sentimental. What's always intrigued me about Puccini, who was famously apolitical, is the choice of subject matter with him, which is that he, you know, we think of Verismo as just being realistic or something. It's not. It was the whole process. The whole movement of Verismo was about putting people from, if you like, poor, deprived backgrounds to the forefront of drama or novels, or so in a sense there is, and Puccini's choice of Manon Lescaut, of Bohème, of Butterfly, perhaps more than anybody, is you know, it's a statement about something. It's a statement about compassion with the underdog, and that I find really interesting. And that, to me, makes Puccini fundamentally unsentimental. He's not trying to. I can't quite say he's not trying to milk it emotionally, but there's something else at play with it, and that's what intrigues me. It's not just you know, subjective. There's something else there. There's an awareness of something there, of something.
Yeah.
Not political, but our common humanity, basically.
We have an intruder. Elin talked about the vulnerability of Manon Lescaut, and it seems to me that the way into so many operatic roles is to find a central vulnerability.
I think she's an enigma, and what I find quite interesting, you know, about her is, and maybe Elin, maybe this is, you know, this is something we should save till next year. But I mean, she, in a sense, she only really finds her voice in the last act. Is everything else is a response for them, to the most part, to how to everybody else. And then suddenly in the last act, she becomes absolutely aware of the way that she's been treated. I don't think she's money grabbing. I don't think she's venal. I think that there is something enigmatic about her in that, curiously, like, you know, like lots of sort of French actresses, where you don't quite know what they're thinking or what their emotional response to a situation is. Yeah. That's, and I think that's what Des Grieux falls for. I mean, if she wasn't vulnerable, this desire to protect her wouldn't be there, I think. Yeah. So, yeah.
Very good. Francesco, how would you compare the Massenet score for Manon with the Puccini score for Manon Lescaut? I mean, although it's not worth even having that discussion.
No, well, I think it's interesting because I think it's something that, particularly for a British audience, I think it's very interesting, because I think in the history of operas about Shakespeare or about very famous literary sources, there's always been the feeling that by going astray from the book, from the play, committed something, you know, not really nice, not something really commendable. But it's fun in a way to think that Massenet opera is completely the original novel. It really, really almost, really, really spotless, musical, beautiful rendition of the novel. When really Puccini just picks and chooses and does something else. There's a famous quotation, because it was very daring for Puccini, who was still very much unknown when he wrote Manon Lescaut, which was his first big public success, to pick Manon, because Jules Massenet, who was really a blockbuster French opera composer at the time, had already done Manon, only calling Manon rather than Manon Lescaut. So it was really a challenge to write, after such a big successful opera, to write another one. And then Puccini said, well, Massenet did his Manon in a very French way, all about the period, all about the perfumes, all about the color, and I will do it in an Italian way, passionate and desperate. Of course, it was a big statement. He also asked cheekily that surely a woman like Manon could have more than one lover, but that's a very kind of cheeky comment. He was quite a womanizer, as we know. But I think what's interesting is that Puccini decided the central character of Manon is really Manon, while in the novel and in Massenet opera, we could say that the opera is more about De Grieux. Well, in Manon Lescaut, he really uses this obsession that he had for portraying a strong and complex female character. That he toyed for many years about an opera on Marie Antoinette, because he was really drawn by this very complex female character. And I think Manon Lescaut stands out completely because, first of all, it's very hard to label her. And she is, I think, possibly the most, maybe with Turandot at the end, the most interesting soprano character that he ever wrote. Because all the others, they're wonderful, but you can just tell, Mimi is Mimi. From the moment she enters till the end, it's her. There's hardly any change there. And even some other character like Minnie, Fanciulla del West, who I love completely, you can still see a journey, but the starting point of the journey is the same person in a way at the end of the journey. With Manon, you start from a girl which is barely out of her teens, and then this incredible thing, and until the end, as Stephen said, you really don't know who is, and she doesn't know who she is. And I think in a way that's what really makes a difference, because even at the end, Manon by Massenet is still pretty much that 18th century character, when Manon is really a much more complex character, because he really managed to do that. Really, you really don't know what she is, and she don't know who she is.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. I hope everybody viewing and listening to this will appreciate the level of complexity and insight which is brought to these productions by everybody taking part. It's months and months and years of work to get to the heart of what it's all about. I'm now going to concentrate on Elin and probably say goodbye for this particular program to Stephen and Francesco. We're not been too long. Thank you both so much. I was really grateful for you to doing this, and actually what both of you said is hugely entertaining, well, more than entertaining, interesting, I think, for what's going to come next year. So Elin, just before you end with a song from this, an aria from this opera, we don't know what it's going to be yet. Would you like to say a little bit more about the process, the journey towards building up this huge operatic role, and for when we actually would have been this year, but now you've got another year. Does that extra year help you in any way, or is it actually?
I definitely think it's easy to get negative and to feel you've been robbed of something. However, I kind of feel quite positive about it, because I am young to be singing Manon. I know I'm young. I don't have a huge instrument neither. I have an instrument that travels well, but it's something that I'm really aware of, and so being able to sing the role at the Grange, hopefully I'll be able to really explore the different colour palettes that I have in the vocal, in my voice. But also with Manon, she excites me so much as a role to sing, because the tessitura is just unreal, really. It's not just your typical lyric soprano. And, you know, I've done a couple of bel canto roles with lots of high notes in, so when I got the score and started flicking through and saw that she had more than just a B flat, that excited me straight away. And, you know, and then looking at the different, you know, there's so many different styles of kind of arias or little arietas through the piece that she sings, so it's trying to ensure that I was able to sing those arias or those parts, you know, to the true style that the composer and even the conductor would want. I really took my time learning her. I'm quite meticulous with my learning anyway. I'm a bit neurotic. But I kind of thought, right, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it the right way. And so I've really explored the role technically, vocally. But to be honest, you put in so much work before the rehearsal. And it's actually the rehearsal and music week that really then starts to take it to another realm. I could sing it for the next year in a practice room with my coach, with my singing teacher and everything. But the real work doesn't happen until you're actually in that rehearsal room, exploring what you can achieve with the conductor, what you can achieve with the director. I've got quite a good dramatic intention in me, but I always, when I have a director that can bring something new to the, you know, drawing board for me, it can really open up a completely different realm vocally and dramatically for me. And so that's what really is kind of, you know, I was itching to start on Monday, ready to get to know what this character was going to mean to me and how I was going to sing her, because, you know, I have sung through her, but even though I feel like I know her, I really don't know her until I've done 6 weeks in a room, doors locked, I've pushed it too far, I haven't gone far enough, I've cracked, I've cried, you know, that's the only way you really get to know, and you start to embody a character and you start to actually sing really well. You know, so an extra year will be brilliant because I can sort out all the little tiny things that I can't quite do now.
There were 3 things you said that I think were really interesting. The first thing is that you can't really learn something until you're rehearsing it. I would say you can't really learn something until you actually start performing it.
Yeah.
Because you learn more in performance than at any other time, I suspect. You also said that you're very young for this role. Well, actually, I don't know about that. I'm looking at people like Mirella Freni, Renata Tebaldi and others, and they did it in their late 20s, early 30s. The famous Mirella Freni recording, I think she was relatively young. And the other thing you said about your voice is you don't have a big voice, but it travels well. Well, I would say that that is the ultimate goal of every singer, is to have a voice which travels well and not to oversing to make it sound bigger than it actually is. I mean, you know, the prime example is Pavarotti, who, you know, stunning technique. You wouldn't say that he had a massive voice, but it was so well placed and so well formed, he could fill any theatre. And I would say, as a singer, I'm picking up on what you said, that that's really what we want to do.
Yeah.
And certainly you do, I have to say. There's in Full Stuff last year, your voice sailed over everybody else. It was fantastic to hear. It was great. Thank you all so much. And now we're going to end this podcast. It's really wonderful that we've gone on a little bit too long, but I don't think anybody's going to complain. I think we could have gone on for another hour talking about this because there's so much to be said and you all got so much to say. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at the earliest possible opportunity at the Grange. Well, before that in London when we start rehearsing. And I'm just going to hand over to Elin, who, not now, but we're going to tag it on to the end, is going to sing something with Francesco on the piano. Thank you.
Lord.